Yes, welcome to this evening's lecture. This I've called Understanding the Meaning of Your Life. And if you look at the world today, it can be difficult to see meaning in life, and many people thus have a hard time finding meaning in their own lives. In an increasingly chaotic, warlike, and apparently a very unjust world. And unjust existence for many. After all, the world is plagued by an unimaginable wealth for some and the deepest poverty for others. For materialistic science and for materialistic human beings, there is basically no overriding meaning in life. It is basically meaningless and random. So human fate is seemingly that one must, is seemingly a chaotic and random world is something that one must accept. Or fight for power and wealth, and thereby, in some extent, try to overcome and control one's destiny. And there is an old and, in fact, completely outdated ideology behind this way of thinking, the law of the jungle, that everyone looks after themselves, an ideology that has roots in our declining animal consciousness. But due to humane development, it cannot anymore explain the mental states in which humanity finds itself in today. And there are different areas that have tried to explain the meaning of life through history. And in ancient times, for many people, and for many people right up to our time, one has had religion to rely on for purpose in life. God has, by his creation, the world and creation of man, at the same time created meaning in life. The purpose is then to follow God's commandments and hope that life unfolds as one desires. And we also know from the metaphysical philosophical tradition, all the way up to the middle of the 1980s, the 1800s, that there's a higher power of God that was created, that has created an orderly universe, which then, with our reason, we can try to comprehend. And we see Plato. Plato is one of the greatest philosophers of all times that has influenced the Western philosophy a lot. And the so-called ideas, for example, that underlie the whole of life. These ideas give a purpose to the world and determine the tasks of man in world. And this has inspired many Western philosophers. And if we look at the biology, and we ask biology today about meaning of life, Fredrik Christiansen, who is a biology and researcher, he says biological life has no meaning. We still ask for a purpose because it lies deep in our human culture that we want to understand and master the world. And of course, eat, survive, and breed has been the theme through whole existence from the animal kingdom. And then now we have man who asks, what is it all about? And the answer often for the materialistic people or human being is the same. It is actually eat, survive, and breed. And if we ask the modern philosophy, Paul Lübke, it's an article for Videnskab.dk, he says, he formulates the question, what is the purpose of life? If we ask what is the meaning of life, we must ask what is the purpose of life? And to this modern philosophy responds that life has no purpose indeed. We have to find it ourselves. And it is therefore up to the individual human being to ask himself, what do I want with life? And this is very much according to existential philosophy. And so when a human being, a humanistic being, we need a meaning in life, and we can choose an human ideology. We don't necessarily believe in Christianity, but we can take it as a method in life or an ideology that's nice. And modern theology on meaning of life, there's Kirsten Nielsen, who's a priest and theologian. She summarizes, one can say, the modern Lutheran tradition that the meaning of life is to live for one neighbor, for the people around us. And of course, this is in the tradition of the neighborly love. That becomes the meaning for Christian people today, to live for our neighbor and try to live up to the ideology of Christianity. But for the modern materialistic man, life is largely random, so that the struggle for existence becomes clear, and securing him and his family the best conditions and earning as much as possible becomes a top priority in life. And at the same time, of course, there are many modern people who are very humanistic and become more interested in science, art, and culture. And perhaps they chose a human ideology, as I mentioned, to get a meaning in life. It's hard for many humane, materialistic people that how the world is looking. So they need something to ease this meaningless in the materialistic world. So, but it's not so strange that we see the materialistic ideology of life very dominant in our time, as it is in our time that darkness and materialism culminates, where man develops his intelligence by means of science, by examining the nature, the social conditions, and the psychic. But it's also a time when dark and suffering and collective waves of karma hits humanity like never before. And if you believe the spiritual science, then it is precisely the mission of this collective karma waves, the mission of the darkness, the suffering, to teach us empathy or compassion for all living beings. But it's also a time where we, through the last great epoch of world redemption, gain knowledge about the situation we as human beings are in. And although it is difficult to see meaning in the chaotic conditions we are experiencing on the planet now, there's a high degree of purpose or meaning by the events we are witnessing now, according to spiritual science, according to Martinus. And this new epoch of world redemption started approximately about year 1900, the New World Impulse, as Martinus explains it. And we can see a being of a lot of spiritual science, powerful intelligence development, materialism, atheism, abstract art, individualism, greater freedom, and humanism. So we see both atheism and materialism, but also religious science growing, and freedom rights, and so. So it's been the last 100 years have been very. The development has been growing or going very fast, one can say. And if we look beyond the world today, we see crisis, revolts, and wars. We see how the deity or God reveals more now than before how the darkness works. We are shown how the darkness works, for example, by the financial institutions, the principle of robbery, as Martinus explains the principle of business. So there's a lot of conflicts and wars in the world today. We have had a corona pandemic for almost a year and a half that requires more and more human lives, and probably an economic crisis and the aftermath. We have to see, we don't know yet. So the world is in every way in the midst of a violent global crisis. But they are crises that are necessary for us to move forward, according to Martinus, and to be able to create a lasting peace on the planet and a lasting peace in every human mind. So for Martinus, there would be a clear connection between such a pandemic as we are witnessing now and the way that we behave towards the animals, how we cage them in, millions of animals into big facilities, production facilities. So it's all about our attitude towards the animals. So we have to learn this, that we cannot go on any longer and treat the animals, treat other living beings, of course, humans as well. We treat them very badly as well. So this is one of the tools that God uses to waken mankind up. We also see climate crisis, or is it climate crisis or is it natural changes? That there's no doubt that we are in some kind of a climate crisis, where we are seeing rising temperatures on the planet, and the scientific consensus, at least for the most part, that these temperature rises are man-made, and the whole climate crisis is something that concerns people very much. It makes people uneasy. And many people are very worried about the future we are facing with my children or grandchildren. Will they have a world or a planet to grow up in when they grow up? With these rising temperatures and apparently maybe rising sea levels, which is predicted. But according to Martinus, however, these climate changes are almost exclusively due to the planet's own inner mentality. So how the planet is conducting its mentality, behaving, it's of course speaking to other planets and learning stuff, and it's very close to its final initiation. So there are things happening with the planet that reflects on the microcosmic level with the humankind. So Martinus would not be so how to say, worried about the future of the climate. He would say that it's the planet that is the boss. And when sometimes when you see there's a crisis on Earth, the temperature rises because of the energy of gravity, of course. But as we saw in the First and Second War, for example, temperatures rose, but in the middle of the war, then there came cold winters. So that's the planet's response to this high temperature and warlike states on Earth. So the energy of feeling comes and cools it down. So I'm not personally not so worried about how the planet will, how things with the climate will go in the future. But we have to see. And furthermore, we live in a very strange time where the truth obviously does not mean much anymore. We live in the time of misinformation. And the agenda of the leaders, their dreams of power, and we see world leaders who have a very relaxed relationship with the truth and events and adapt it to their own selfish needs. And we see how the world leadership actually reminds us of a big dysfunctional family. And all this contributes to a growing unrest in humanity. People are unrest, they're feeling uneasy about this, because we can say these people, we can't take them seriously, and they are our leaders, and where are we going with our future? But life is anything but random, according to Martinus. It's governed by spiritual laws that affect all aspects of our lives, including the law of cause and effect, the principle of causality. And not just our lives, but the whole cosmos, infinitely far down into the microcosmos and up to the macrocosmos. It's just a joke I took with me. I can translate it to English. Merkel says to Trump, "You cannot send astronauts to the sun. They would burn up." But Trump says, no, it's okay. I will send them up in the nighttime. So, yes. But if we want to talk about the meaning of life, we have to understand what life is in itself. It makes sense to start with a spiritual scientific definition of what life is. And according to Martinus, life is something eternal and all encompassing. What we perceive and call our universe is just one of infinitive universes, all of which functions as living cells in an eternal and infinite organism. And so it is with the whole physical world, living cells within living cells, from atoms to infinitely far down into the microcosmos, to our body cells, to organs, to organisms, to planets, to solar systems. to galaxies and universes and so on. And all these units of life thus constitute cells in a single organism, the organism of God, the eternally living world spirit. And as this artistic picture or representation indicates, there are already some far-sighted scientists who have begun to see astonishing similarities between the brain's network, the neurons, brain cells, and the network of galaxies based on more detailed images of the galaxies. They can see how the galaxies have electric structures between them, and it's very similar to how the brain cells have electric connections between them. So there are some scientists who are a bit far ahead, and which Martinus explains that the science of future, we will more and more start to research things as a living being, as expressions of living being. We will see nature as an expression of a living being. All movements will we see as an expression of something living. Here we can see a picture of a spiral circle or the organism principle, and just took this for the picture's sake. We can see the galaxy and the planet, the solar system, our planet, and our organism, cells, and the spiral of matter. And these 7 spiral circles, the systems of organisms, they repeat themselves through the cosmic spiral circle. So just to put it pictures, so you can see how it is. And if you look at the simple cosmic consciousness, unconsciousness, it is precisely an expression of how materialistic man looks at human nature. It sees only the lifeless materialistic side, only finds that man consists of some mental faculties or abilities such as intelligence, emotions, memories, instinct, and drives, perhaps intuition, but does not see any subject or an I that manifests and experiences life using these mental abilities. So we see these mental abilities here, intelligence and gravity, feeling, and so on. So this is, we see the course which symbolizes the perfect creation. But this cosmic structure is hidden for this materialistic view, this materialistic people. We have, of course, 2 world views collide in the explanation of what consciousness is and the meaning of life. And according to science, our psyche or consciousness is just or merely effect of cosmic or chemical reactions in our brain. But according to Martinus, there is more to the living being than just the created part or the space and time part. So there's a lack of superstructure on the living being, something that makes the living being alive and not just a collection of dead forces as we saw in the last symbol. And that is the being super consciousness, the eternal part of the living being. And most of you probably know the symbol of the living being, but we have the I or the self, the creator, and we have, he calls that X1. We have X2 here, the ability to create and experience, and we have the X3, the created part. So we have the eternal part, the over-consciousness, the eternal part of the living being, and we have the created part, the temporal part. We have the stillness, the I, and the movement. So Martinus explains that in reality only 2 things in life exist: stillness and movement. And the I is the stillness that has, one could say, maybe an eternal potential for creating. It's always creating, it's always sending impulses and created impulses or actions out through the principle of creation and experience, creating reactions in the created part, where time and space and the movement is, and then again experiencing life. So the I is setting the movement forward, but in the end also experiencing this movement. So the I is creating and experiencing life. Yes. So I took the liberty of taking a long quotation here, which Martinus describes the I, because I think it's the I that is the central. It's the living in the universe, the cosmos, in all living beings. And we all have the same I, by the way, according to Martinus. There's only one I in the whole of universe, and we have a part of this I. So he says, so the I's true nature cannot be described as being in a certain place because it's quite outside space. Distances and places are created attributes of space. But as space is also a product created by the I, then the I itself must constitute a higher form of being. And as this form of being exists outside created things, it is non-manifest. But a non-manifest existence must in itself be a nameless entity. For whatever one might say about it, one's statements could never be anything but definitions of created things. That is to say, things as existing in time and space, things created by the I. If we say of this or that, it is good or bad, that it is light or dark, this is saved or lost, all these expressions refer only to created situations brought about by the I, and consequently cannot constitute the true analysis of the I's own nature itself, outside time and space, beyond all forms and created things. This is a quotation from the Book of Life, number 2. And I have a short quotation from Book of Life, number 4 as well. Since the I itself has no temporal or spatial analysis whatsoever and can be expressed only as something that is, it is thus intrinsically a nameless something that we, as the reader already knows, may call X. So this is the innermost core of all living beings, which life originates from. And the eternal element of life, one could say. So again, this I is situated here up, the self or the I or the creator of the living being. And what is then God? This eternal living being who constitutes all that exists. Martinus writes here in the article Providence that all living beings in the infinite universe constitute respectively universes and matter for each other. They represent living beings, cycles within living beings, which is the same thing as God's image. But then what is God? It is the limitless whole in which all these myriads of living beings live, move and have their being. It is the universe or cosmos as a living being. So there's nothing that exists outside God. God is everything and endless. There's not a limit. We cannot travel to a limit and say, aha, here stops God. It's actually cells inside cells, or universes inside universes, and endlessly out in macrocosmos. So there's no end to God. God is everything that exists. And we can see here, according to Martinus, the living being always is connected or living inside this Godhead. There's a symbol called the eternal cosmic organic connection between God and the Son. And we see the eye of the Son of God and our consciousness or super consciousness and the physical organisms here. And outside this living being or Son of God, we have the Godhead, we have the eye of the Godhead and super consciousness and the physical and spiritual worlds. So we are always inside of this living being. We cannot meet anything in our lives that isn't a part of God. Nature, animals, people, everything we meet is a part of this eternal organism. It's a very beautiful symbol. I always like this symbol very much. So there's an eternal connection, and although that many people become atheist and materialistic, this connection is always there. This connection doesn't go away. But when we start to study again, or we start to reflect on the possibility that maybe there is a God, and we start to study spiritual science, then we start to talk to this Godhead. We start to meditate or pray, and there's a connection. There will arise a connection when we are talking to this Godhead. But for the materialistic people, they don't believe in this connection. But the connection is always there. And when we start to pray or meditate, this connection will grow, and it will eventually become more day conscious. And although we feel now through prayer that God doesn't answer, God is actually always answering through the cosmos, through the environment, through other people that we meet all day long. So there's answers all, but we have difficulty often by reading the nature or understanding what God is replying. So that's a problem, of course. What humanity perhaps needs most now is the science of life, that life is eternal, that the cosmic laws make sense of all things in life, that life is an eternal learning process, and that we constantly receive feedback or get proofreading of life throughout the principle of karma and the principle of reincarnation, that no coincidence exists anywhere. And Martinus, he explains why we need a new spiritual science. He says in the article Breakdown and Religion, the individual must have a science of the mental world and its laws and of his own mental structure. He must connect his intelligence with a living feeling or neighborly love, and this combination will lead people to the intuitive experience of the connection between all living beings who live and move and have their being in the universal organism of the Godhead. It's a really a nice article. Yes. So the fact of the matter is that until we gain self-knowledge, until we can experience the cosmic principles ourselves with our own beginning intuition, then we must begin to taking spiritual science as a working hypothesis. Because we don't know. Martinus has seen this thing with his cosmic consciousness, and we don't really know ourselves. But there's something in our energy system, there's something in our heart, in our mind that says, this is maybe right, this is maybe true. I want to research and find out and read more, and could there be a meaning in life? Could there be that the spiritual science is something that is right? So we must tentatively assume that there are spiritual laws or cosmic principles, just as we know the physical laws of nature within science. And even to start researching life, to start researching the meaning of life, the meaning of my own life. And God is a theory and reality. As Martinus writes, I can only give you the theoretical experience of the Godhead, not the emotional one. That can be given only by the Godhead alone. Through sufferings, the feeling and humanness in the human being develops, not merely through one life, but through many. Thus the Godhead become increasingly a living reality. And as I said, through prayer, this reality becomes more living for us. Yes, and the areas we can start to research, and many scientists and humane scientists are already started to research in this area of spiritual science. We have many books on reincarnation or on near-death experiences. The last decades, there have been many wonderful books written on the subject. Young children in the age of 2, 3, 4, or 5 that remember very clearly that they were born someplace, and they can show their parents, I was born there, and maybe in another country. And karma, one can of course start to research in one's own life and see, is there meaning in my life? The things that are happening for me now, is there a possibility that I in somehow was started that before? I did some things many years ago that I experienced these things now. So we can look at our own lives and see the meaning in the things that we experience. And the theory of evolution is also a great subject to dive into. How thoughts affect the body. About biologists like what is it called? Bruce Lipton. He has done a lot of research in this area and others as well. How our thoughts and mentality actually affect our body and can change the DNA. Maybe not change the DNA, but they can turn it on and turn it off, sicknesses and so on. So it has a great effect, and there's a lot of research in that area. Vegetarianism and health, there's also a lot of movement, the vegan movement with the young people now, and some research also in that area. If I eat as a vegetarian or a vegan, will I become healthier? There are some studies that indicates that vegans or vegetarians are much more healthy. And the whole field of parapsychology and clairvoyance and intuition, many places in the world, they have institutions that have for decades have made some research in that area. And cells as self-regulating units and the earth as a living being. I think, was it in the 80s that James Lovelock published his book Gaia on the earth as a self-regulating system, and almost concluding that the earth must be a living being. So this is also an area one could research in. And then the personal research, which is the most important, responsibility for own development. So that would be the most important area of research, to get the clarity about the meaning of our own lives, is researching our own minds. In the past, we have had our focus on the outside in the animal kingdom, on our surroundings, as our survival depended on whether we could read our surroundings correctly or not. Question of being eaten or eat oneself. But now we need to focus on our inner self, map our own psyche, and come to terms with the aspects of our mentality that are still selfish or primitive. When and how do we get annoyed at others? When do we blame others for when it does not go as we want it? Anger, hatred, jealousy. So we must come to clarity over these aspects in our mentality and fight them. As Martinus says, we must get to know the bonds that binds us mentally in order to become totally free. And there's a quotation here about that. No human beings can be completely free as long as they are not in touch with the forces of nature or the universe. They are, on the contrary, often in direct disharmony with these forces, which results in them coming to experience sad fates, illness, and sufferings. In order to be able to be free, people must first and foremost know which ties bind them. So it's very important that we come to acknowledge these forces in ourselves and work with them. And like I said, the bonds that are binding us today is our own unfinished sides, the remaining mental remnants of the animal kingdom mentality. And since everything we experience in life, in reality, is a reflection of our own inner mentality, as we cannot experience anything that we have not created ourselves in the past, and which returns through the karma principle, then we begin to understand that the others are not our enemies. And even though they sometimes have the task of bringing unpleasant experiences or moods that we don't like, and we begin to understand that life is a question of personal teaching between the individual or God. We are always in this personal teaching situation. And we begin to understand that in order to find meaning in life, to have a happy life or a meaningful life, we must follow the laws of life and stop going against the laws of life. And what is the law of life? After all, in the animal kingdom, the law of life was the killing principle, to kill or be killed. But it is no longer a condition of life for human being to kill others to survive. So the new law of life is the fact, the one that Christ formulated, that we must love our neighbor. And who is our neighbor? It's all living. It's everything around us. Everything is living. It's our fellow human beings and the animals. It's our microcosmos, our micro beings, and it's the globe as our macro being. And as long as man in various ways is in conflict with the law of life, then we never achieve a completely happy life. Then we are still in conflict with other people. Then we have not understood yet that we cannot change the others. We can only change ourselves. And that it is not the fault of others when something happens to us that we think is unfair. I did read that already, didn't I? Yes, thank you. And when we begin to withdraw our projections on others, psychological projections, to understand that it is not the fault of others when things go wrong in our lives, then we can start using a very powerful and effective tool, and that's forgiveness. And Martinus writes here in the Book of Life 7, forgiving your neighbor for anything evil whatsoever that he may have inflicted upon you is thus the correct 100% fulfillment of the law of life. This forgiveness thus constitutes the way to light, to happiness, and to bliss. So people, if you want to have excitement and bliss in your life, you need to start forgiving everybody. This is a very simple formula, but very effective indeed. And so how do we get the strength to forgive our neighbor when he is bothering us in very different ways and difficulties and problems? So Martinus says, by trying to understand with our intelligence that the person in question at the moment cannot be any more different than he really is. Just as a thistle or a stinging nettle cannot be different than they are. So if we touch a stinging nettle or a rose, we cut ourselves. And by realizing that when this enemy is brought into our vicinity, he is cosmically not an enemy who wants us to die, but merely a tool through which God lets us reap what we ourselves have sown in the past. So the principle of karma and principle of reincarnation is really important to understand this principle of karma, and the karma is always working. It's not like Wednesdays it's not working, but Thursdays is working again. Either the principle of karma is a universal principle or it's not. So I meet a lot of spiritual people that think sometimes karma works and sometimes not. When I want it to work, it works. But that's not a so logical way of thinking. And he says here, what we do to our neighbor, we do to God. And what our neighbor does to us is God's answer to us on our way of being towards our neighbor. That is, our way of being towards God's. But because the only thing we can meet in life is actually God. We meet other living beings, but they represent the Godhead. So everything we meet in life represents this eternal Godhead. And he says also, when man begins to move away from the flock, he may feel alone, but when he learns the laws of life and understands the power of prayer, he understands that he is never alone, but that there are spiritual forces behind human beings and society's transformation and development. So there is always a power, there's always comfort to get in this difficult process that many of us have to go outside of the flock in many different ways, and then we have to stand alone. So we can get a tremendous power, help, force through the prayer to help us get through all kinds of difficulties. And another very powerful tool is of course thankfulness. And how can we create a joy in everyday life? Well, in the morning before you get out of bed, you can find something to be thankful for, and you can. Martinus was talking very much about explaining that in the morning you can put some intentions that you want to be loving and try to be helpful and meeting other people in the best way and be helping for them. So that's a very good and powerful intention to put in your mind before you go out of bed or before you go out of the house in the morning. And then you can do the same in the evening before you go to bed. You can find one or more things to be grateful for, things you have experienced during the day. And also people that have been kind to you, you can think kind to them. And also people that have been unkind to you, you can think kindly of them. And if you have yourself been angry to them, you can think very kindly to them. And maybe the day after or next time you meet these people, you can say, I'm sorry, I was just, I lost my temper. So it's always good to repair those relations we have. And sharing and listen without judging, that's always a good thing. Sometimes we like most to hear ourselves talking, but it's a really good exercise just to listen and hear what the other people have to say. So gratitude also increases our state of joy. And it's good to remember someone who has done something for you. And if you didn't had the opportunity to thank them, you can write a letter or thank them when you meet again. So the art of living, it's all about the art of living. So the meaning of life at the present stage of development is that we must become a kind of life artists. We must become geniuses in living life in the best way. We must become moral geniuses. And what does that mean? Well, as our human development progresses, our compassion grows, our highest desire in life will be to be of benefit and joy to other people, other beings, all beings actually. The meaning of life is thus that we should experience it and enjoy life. We are given life to enjoy it. Enjoy all the amazing gifts that our planet gives us. Enjoy each other's company. Create beautiful works of art for each other. In fact, there is only one rule in all this life, and it's the rule that we will come to carry in our hearts, and that is that we can do whatever we want as long as it does not affect others in a negative way. But then karma hits. And then we, of course, will learn. So we will become completely free to explore all the desires, abilities, and talents we may possess, just as long as we take into account the other living beings around us, both in the microcosmos, our own intermediate cosmos, plants, animals, humans, and in the macrocosmos. Of course, we have to learn to take better care of our planet and stop using it as a trash can. Martinus also tells us that we must be careful not to live too much ahead of our actual standard of development. And on the other hand, not behind our standard of development either. We need to be where we feel most inspired. There we are most on wavelength with our actual mentality. This does not mean that we cannot have great ideals and that represent something higher, something more noble, but ordinary people should not start living as ascetics or saints if they are not, and on the other side, not living more primitive as if they are not, which associates selfish and destructive behavior. Some people actually manage to live their lives under their moral standard. Sometimes if you become an alcoholic or something, and you lose your foot in life, and then you actually become able to live under your moral standards. You do things that you wouldn't normally do. So then you live under your moral standards. So what is the time saying? Yes, we have some few minutes. I was just wanted to bring up we saw a film here on a Monday, was it, about the huge research done. I think it was like 700 males in America, and they had followed them for 75 years. And the thing that was the conclusion of this research was, it doesn't matter if you're rich or famous or anything. The most important thing is our relations with other people and the quality of the relations we have with other people. And the research showed very clearly that it affected our health, our mental health, our physical health. If people were lonely and not had any good relationship, they became ill and died 10 or 20 years before other people. So I took some things here from the positive psychology as well. Martinus Centre was the one that did some research on that some decades ago. And they found out, for example, that lotto winners are just happy in a short time. After 6 months, they are back to their normal level of happiness. They can win maybe 50 or 100 million, but they are only happy for a short period of time. We are much richer today than our parents' generation and grandparents' generation, but we are not happier. On the other hand, depression and anxiety are increasing in our society. Well, our society is of course much more complex than it was before, but there is something there. If we get our dream job, then I will be happier. No, that's not true, only for a short while. If I move to a place with sun and summer, then I will be happier. No. People are not happier in California than in Massachusetts. So it's the attitude that I have in life toward myself, towards others, the relationships I have. Of course, like we talked about in the study group, if you're living in a very poor village in Africa and you have to, you use all the time, you're staying awake to trying to get food or water or something. Of course, it's hard to be happy, but some people would be happy under these very hard conditions anyhow. And there was one external factor that this survey made, and that was the relation between democracy and dictatorship. They found that people living in democracy in a state or a country which are more secure, and you don't have to be afraid all the time about being slain down or killed or something. That actually made a difference in in effects or level of happiness. And let's see. So there are some things. The positive outlook. It's very important to be positive on how we regard life, and always meet life with a positive attitude. To try to be positive towards other people, and not be a victim of circumstances, culture, background, education, etc. And just try to take responsibility of your own life. And Martinus talks about this mentality of offermentalitet, of offering. No, that's not the right. Victim mentality. Was that? Yeah, victim, being a victim, and that's it's not a good mentality, because it actually can lead to depression and psychosis later if you carry on for several incarnations with this victim mentality. The people who focus most on their strengths rather than their weaknesses tend to be most successful. It's from America, of course. There's always talking about success. But of course it's good to focus on the things that make you happy and your strengths, rather than focuses on things that make you unhappy and your mental things or that are not good. It's good to focus on the positive thing about oneself and not focusing on the negative things about oneself. And how do we live our lives? Do we go for what makes us happy, or do we run away from ourselves? Do we run away from pain or conflicts, or do we stand up and say our meaning in a loving way, of course? And when we focus on the positive in our lives, we focus on prevention of depression and anxiety, and like the different surveys show, that also the physical health. And of course, we need to identify and cultivate our passion. What makes my life meaningful? Why have I been put on this earth? What is my mission? When we address those issues, we tend to get happier and healthier. So people, find out what your mission in life is and go for it. Thank you very much.